Okay, AP Psych class, welcome to part 2 of Unit 7A. We're going to explore the second two processes of memory. We've already discussed encoding. Now let's talk about storage and retrieval. Okay, so remember that storage is going to be that second process, right? The initial putting of information into our memory was called encoding. There's really, obviously no point in encoding unless we work at retaining that information. And so when we talk about storage, that's what we're talking about, the retaining of the information. So it helps us to go back and review that information processing model to discuss the metaphorical places in our memory where these things are occurring. And so concerning the storage capacity of the three stages of memory, right? Remember that sensory memory is just our initial recording of information. Think of it as kind of like the threshold to your memory. So information is, standing on the doorstep of your memory, and it's knocking. It's waiting to be let in. But we don't let everything that's on the threshold in, and so your sensory memory is just that threshold, right? Fleeting images, which we are sometimes use the term iconic memory, or fleeting auditory stimuli, which is known as echoic memory, right? We're talking about seconds. And it's gone, right? It's not going to stay there unless you work at paying attention to it and allowing it in to that second stage, which is short-term or working memory. Okay, so there's also our senses are bombarded with stimulation all the time. Think of that as your sensory memory. We don't let everything in. We don't pay attention to everything, and that's the stuff we pay attention to would be in short-term or working memory. And so, we the reason, remember, that we don't like to really call it short-term memory anymore is because of this misconception that things are stored in short-term memory. Nothing is stored in short-term memory. Within seconds, information is going to be gone unless you're either using the information, think, repeating a phone number in your head over and over again until you can, write it down on a piece of paper or type it into your own phone, or you're actually working at encoding it, right? Well, it's encoded now, but working at storing it in long-term memory, right? So think of short-term or working memory. You're either using it or it's gone. The magic number 7 plus or minus 2 is kind of the catchphrase developed by George Miller. It's just kind of talking about the capacity of short-term and or working memory, right? That any larger information would need to either be chunked into more manageable bits, or is going to fall prey to that serial position effect that we've already discussed. So, short-term or working memory is limited in its capacity as well. Any memory that you have stored in your brain would technically be stored in this metaphorical place we call long-term memory. Okay, long-term memory is, limitless. It doesn't seem to, be something that you're just going to run out of space, concerning storing things in your brain. But that's the key, right? And when we talk about storage, don't fall for any tricks. If a memory is stored, it is in long-term memory. Okay, so how exactly does your brain store memories? Okay, there's a number of different theories, all having some merit to them. Lots of research in, honestly, California sea slugs has taught us that on a neurological level, when information is learned and in turn committed to memory, we actually see changes on a synaptic level. And so synaptic changes are evidence of memory. The term that's used to describe this is LTP, or long-term potentiation, which is just an increase in the firing potential, right, after some brief stimulation. So basically what this means is that we see more connections. Remember, they're not literally touching, but we see more connections. We see more dendrites, reaching out across synaptic gaps once the neuron is familiar with the signal. And so that's just kind of showing, right, that practice really does make perfect, right? That the more that you stimulate with a memory or with a piece of information, the easier it becomes to transfer that out of long-term memory, use it in short-term memory, and then store it again back in long-term memory. And so, that can actually be witnessed on a neurological level, which is quite fascinating. We also know that stress hormones play a role in memory, okay, and that when we're excited and stressed, right, emotion-triggered stress hormones are actually making more glucose available to the cells in your brain, which, if you remember from, sophomore biology class, means obviously that more energy means that it can work harder. And so some evidence of that are what are known as flashbulb memories, right? A flashbulb memory would be a memory that is very clear and very vivid, and it's usually a memory of an emotionally significant moment or event. It could be positive or negative, right? A car accident, or winning the lottery. When anything is emotionally charged, right? We have the stress hormones being released, offering more glucose. The more fuel the neurons have, the more likely they are to commit very specific details of that memory to long-term memory. And so we know that plays a role. Use that as a study tip. If you can make things attach emotion to information that you need to know, whether it be making the information funny, or just being passionate about what it is you're learning, more likely that you'll probably be able to recall that information at a later point in time. Okay, concerning the actual parts of the physical brain that are responsible for the storage of memories, right, we're going to revisit two spots, the hippocampus and the cerebellum. And this has to do with the type of memory being stored, okay? And so when we talk about types of memories, we can talk about implicit memories, which are sometimes called non-declarative memories or procedural memories. So if you ever see procedural memory, non-declarative memory, implicit memory, all the same thing. Okay, those are the sorts of things, think skills that you've acquired that you can actually use without any sort of conscious recall. Like, I'm talking to you right now. That's a skill, that I've acquired. The English language. I don't have to, think hard about what it is I'm saying. I just say it. Can't even tell you what I just said just now, right? That's just implicit memory. Driving a car, typing your research paper, right? All involve implicit memory. Explicit memory is going to be also known as declarative memory. That's the stuff that requires conscious effort to recall. Okay? And so this is what you need to remember. The hippocampus is responsible for the storage of explicit memory. Okay, now the information is not stored in the hippocampus, but we know that the hippocampus is responsible for storing it into long-term memory. All right, individuals that have lost their hippocampus or parts of their hippocampus either to disease or surgery have the inability to store new explicit or declarative memories. So they cannot store memories of events, they can't not store new facts or general knowledge. And the cerebellum is for the implicit or non-declarative procedural memories. Skills, right? Motor and cognitive skills, right? So it's something you've been classically conditioned to do. That's all happening in the cerebellum, all right? So make sure that you are aware of that. There's always usually a question or two regarding that on the AP exam. Okay. So it does no good to store things unless we can use them at a later point in time, right? That's retrieval, pulling the information out of long-term memory and putting it back into working memory for use, right? Whenever you think about something, you're pulling it from long-term and retrieving it back into short-term. Okay, recall is the way that we measure memory, right? That a person has to retrieve the information that they've learned previously, like a fill in the blank or an essay test is a great example of recall. Recognition and relearning are evidence that memory and learning have happened. Remember that recognition is just when you don't necessarily, you're not able to recall the information. Actually, you don't need to recall the information. You need only identify an item as being something that you've learned previously. So think multiple choice tests involve recognition. And if you've ever not done well and had to relearn a piece of information, it's a lot easier to do than it was to learn it the first time around. Again, evidence that the memory is still there someplace in your long-term memory. Okay, we can use some things to help us here, right? Retrieval cues, right, would be any sort of mnemonic device that you're using to aid in the recall of information. Something to review here from 40 studies is this concept of priming, right? That's an sometimes unconscious activation of an association. So remember, think back to, being primed, right? Remember our Loftus and Palmer experiment with the car crash video from 40 studies, right? When we're primed, we can, remember information, in the case of that case study, differently than it was initially stored, right? But you can prime your memory to remember or recall information that you need. Some things to keep in mind, though. Context and internal emotions do affect how we recall information. Okay, that wonderful sensation of deja vu, right? That you've experienced this in the past. Okay, most psychologists will not say that this is a result of reincarnation or that you, are psychic or anything of that nature, but simply that information that is similar to previously stored memories can actually feel like you've experienced that new information before, and it's probably just a result of unconscious recognition that it is similar, right? And so, perhaps I have a student in class and I'm like, I feel like I've had this person in class before. And then I, later learn, that I had their older sibling, 10 years ago in class. And that's why they felt familiar to me, is that they may be similar in looks and mannerisms to their older sibling. Context-dependent memory, right, just means that it's easier to retrieve information when you're in the same place as where the information was stored. And mood-congruent memory just means that oftentimes emotion is attached to memories, so it's the tendency to recall experiences that are consistent with one's current mood, right? So when you're in a bad mood, everything that annoys you comes to mind, right? And when you're in a good mood, you tend to be able to easier retrieve happy memories. And so just those things are important to keep in mind, as they definitely affect the information that we recall or the information that we don't recall. Okay, so we will do some examples and discussions in class. Bring any questions that you may have with you at that time. Thanks for listening.